There is a woman in Nara who, every night at exactly 9:30, does 5 small things before the rest of the city falls asleep. She dims every light in her apartment to almost nothing. She places her phone in a drawer in the other room. She drinks a small cup of warm, unsweetened tea. She writes 3 lines in a notebook by hand. And she lies down in a room that is colder than most people would ever choose. She is 58 years old. She has never taken a sleeping pill in her life. She falls asleep within minutes and wakes up without an alarm, before her body even needs one to remind it. And somewhere across the world right now, someone is lying in the same bed they've slept in for years, scrolling through their phone at midnight, exhausted but somehow wide awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why 8 hours in bed left them feeling like they got two. Someone who's tried melatonin gummies, blackout curtains, white noise machines, weighted blankets, and every sleep app on the App Store and still wakes up tired. Someone who has read every article, followed every checklist, and still lies there at 1 a.m. doing math in their head about how many hours of sleep they have left before the alarm goes off. What if the difference between these two people has almost nothing to do with how long they're in bed, almost nothing to do with how expensive their mattress is, and almost everything to do with a single hormone that's supposed to rise quietly in the evening, and instead gets blocked, suppressed, and delayed, night after night, without them ever realizing it's even happening? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that hormone is, why modern life is working against it at almost every turn, and 5 small, free, almost invisible habits used for generations in Japan that can start fixing your sleep as early as tonight. No pills, no purchases, no app required. Before we get to the 5 habits, we need to take apart a belief almost everyone has about sleep without ever questioning it. The belief is this: sleep is about quantity. 8 hours, that's the number, that's the goal, that's what every doctor, every wellness influencer, every sleep tracker app is obsessed with measuring down to the minute. Hit the number and you've supposedly won. And for an enormous number of people, chasing that number simply doesn't work. Not because they aren't trying hard enough, not because they're lazy or undisciplined, but because the equation leaves out one variable entirely: a hormone called melatonin. Melatonin isn't just the sleep hormone people casually call it in passing. It's the chemical signal that tells every cell in your body, from your brain down to your digestive system, that night has arrived and it's safe to power down. Scientists call its natural evening rise the dim light melatonin onset, and under normal, undisturbed conditions, it should begin climbing roughly 2 hours before you actually go to bed. A slow, gentle signal, building quietly in the background like a dimmer switch being turned down, not a light switch being flipped off. The problem isn't that this signal exists. The problem is what happens when it's delayed, suppressed, or interrupted before it ever has the chance to build properly. A brain that's still being told, through light, through stimulation, through stress, that its daytime doesn't just struggle to fall asleep. It shifts into what researchers describe as a state of low-grade nighttime alertness, a kind of half-awake idling that never lets the body drop into the deeper stages of rest. And it doesn't just cost you bedtime, it costs you the quality of every hour you do manage to sleep. Multiple studies, including research published in the Journal of Pineal Research, have linked suppressed evening melatonin specifically to lighter, more fragmented sleep, the kind where you technically logged 8 hours on a tracker but never actually felt rested when you woke up. Other research has connected chronically disrupted melatonin rhythms to slower next-day recovery, more daytime fatigue, and even longer-term metabolic and mood effects. This is why so many people can do everything right on paper. Stick to a consistent bedtime, avoid caffeine after lunch, invest in blackout curtains, buy the white noise machine, and still lie there wide awake staring at the ceiling. They're fighting a hormonal pattern with tools that were never actually designed to touch the root cause. So what does touch it? Japan has some of the lowest reported rates of chronic insomnia among industrialized nations, Despite famously long work hours and famously small apartments, two things you'd expect to make sleep worse, not better. And researchers who have looked closely at daily life there keep arriving at the same answer, over and over. It isn't a supplement. It isn't a sleep tracker. It isn't a $400 mattress. It's what happens, or very deliberately doesn't happen, in the 90 minutes before bed. 5 small adjustments, repeated quietly, night after night, for years. Let's go through all 5 because the order they happen in matters just as much as the habits themselves. The first habit is the simplest, and also the one most people get backwards without ever realizing it. As evening arrives, your eyes are sending a constant stream of light information to a tiny cluster of cells deep in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, your internal master clock, the thing that decides whether your body believes it's noon or midnight regardless of what the actual clock on the wall says. And here's what most of us do at exactly the wrong moment, the moment that clock is trying to wind down. We switch on every bright overhead light in the house, scroll through a brightly lit kitchen, and call it a completely normal evening. Researchers studying light exposure have found that bright artificial light in the hours before bed, especially the cool, blue-heavy light from standard overhead LED bulbs, can suppress melatonin production by as much as 50%, close to telling your brain it's still the middle of the afternoon, even as your body is trying to prepare for rest. The Japanese alternative is almost embarrassingly simple, almost too simple to take seriously. Anden, soft, warm, low lighting, often from a single small lamp at floor or table height instead of a harsh overhead bulb. Many traditional Japanese homes are built around this idea entirely, with warm paper lanterns and low lamps replacing the bright overhead lighting common in Western homes in the evening hours. The warmth and dimness of this kind of light gently signal the nervous system that the day is ending, without a single word being said. And before you've done anything else, before you've changed your diet or bought a single product, you've already sent your body a very specific message. It's safe to start slowing down now. That message matters because it's about to be tested almost immediately by habit number 2. And what happens here sets the tone for everything that follows for the rest of the night. Here's something that sounds almost too simple to matter, and yet the research behind it is some of the most consistent in all of sleep science, replicated again and again across different labs in different countries. In the hour before bed, your phone needs to leave the room. Not the nightstand, not face down beside the pillow where it's still within arm's reach. The room entirely, somewhere you'd have to physically stand up and walk to retrieve it. Why does this matter so much? Because a phone screen at close range, held just inches from your face, delivers a concentrated dose of blue wavelength light directly into the eyes at the exact moment your melatonin is supposed to be quietly rising in the background. And when that signal gets disrupted at the source, everything downstream of it drifts too. How quickly you fall asleep, how deep that sleep gets once you do, and yes, how rested or groggy you feel the next morning regardless of how many hours the clock says you slept. Researchers studying circadian rhythms and screen exposure have consistently linked late-night phone and tablet use with both delayed melatonin onset and more fragmented deep sleep later in the night. Here's the chain reaction, step by step. Blue light at night suppresses melatonin. Suppressed melatonin delays sleep onset. Delayed sleep onset shortens deep sleep. And shortened deep sleep is exactly the stage where physical recovery, immune repair, and memory consolidation all happen. One small action in the evening, the simple act of putting a phone in another room, is quietly setting up your entire body for the night ahead. Not just that one night, every single night this becomes a repeated pattern, the effect compounds. In Japan, this is built into something that doesn't even look like a discipline or a rule, just a small wooden box or shallow drawer by the entryway, often used to place keys, wallets, and phones the moment someone walks in for the evening. Not for productivity, not for some elaborate digital detox philosophy, just for distance, just to create a little physical gap between the device and the body. But removing the phone is only half the story, because what you do with that quiet, newly empty hour matters just as much as removing the distraction in the first place. And that's where habit number 3 comes back into this in a way that might genuinely surprise you. This one might be the most uncomfortable habit on this list, so stick with it, because the mechanism behind it is genuinely fascinating once you understand it. Don't drink anything caffeinated after early afternoon, and don't drink alcohol as a sleep aid in the evening either, even though it might be the most common sleep aid people reach for without even thinking of it that way. Here's why, starting with caffeine. Caffeine has a half-life of roughly 5 to 6 hours in most adults, meaning a single cup of coffee or tea at 4 p.m. still has a meaningful, measurable amount circulating in your bloodstream at 10 p.m., quietly competing with the very same receptors your body needs clear and unoccupied in order to feel naturally sleepy. Many people who insist caffeine doesn't affect their sleep are unknowingly sleeping on top of a chemical signal that's still actively working against them. And alcohol works against sleep in a different, sneakier way. While it can make you feel drowsy and help you fall asleep faster at first, it actually suppresses the deep, restorative stages of sleep later in the night, the stages where the body does most of its physical repair. This is exactly why so many people who have a drink or two before bed find themselves wide awake at 3 a.m., heart racing slightly, unable to fall back asleep, with no idea why, since they felt so relaxed just a few hours earlier. The Japanese concept of the deliberate pause, the intentional gap left between two things, applied here simply means giving your evening a buffer, a stretch of several hours where you're not asking your nervous system to simultaneously process a stimulant or a depressant while also trying to wind itself down for the night. The reward isn't just falling asleep faster, although that does happen. It's that the sleep you do get actually does the job it's supposed to do, instead of being technically present but functionally shallow. So far that's light, distance from the phone, and a buffer before bed. But there's a fourth habit, and it directly contradicts something almost everyone assumes about relaxing before sleep, something so common most people have never once questioned it. We've been taught, mostly by habit rather than by any actual evidence, that winding down means watching something, scrolling something, half paying attention to a screen until our eyes eventually get heavy enough to give in. And for some people, in small, occasional doses, that's genuinely fine. But research increasingly suggests that passive screen consumption right before bed keeps the brain in a state of low-level alertness, constantly scanning, constantly anticipating the next clip or notification, never fully allowed to settle into stillness. The Japanese alternative isn't do nothing and stare at the wall. It's a small, repeated, almost ceremonial ritual, writing just 3 lines by hand in a notebook, a practice some describe as a gratitude or reflection journal, often paired with a warm, unsweetened, caffeine-free tea held in both hands. Researchers studying pre-sleep journaling have found that even a few minutes of writing down the day's events, or simply tomorrow's tasks, can measurably reduce the kind of racing, unresolved mental loops that keep people awake long after the lights go out and the eyes are closed. The brain, in a sense, gets permission to stop holding onto the day's loose threads, because those threads have already been written down safely somewhere else, outside the body, outside the mind that's trying to rest. And the fifth habit, the one researchers describe as maybe the most important of all, has nothing to do with what you actively do and everything to do with your bedroom itself, the environment you've built around the act of sleeping without ever really examining it. This is the habit almost nobody follows properly, and the one that may matter most of all 5. Keep your bedroom colder than feels comfortable when you first lie down, somewhere in the range most sleep researchers consistently point to as ideal, and keep it as dark as you can physically make it. darker than most people are willing to tolerate at first. Here's the mechanism behind why this works. Your core body temperature naturally needs to drop by a degree or two in order to trigger and then sustain deep sleep through the night. And a warm room actively fights against that drop, hour after hour, all night long, without you ever consciously noticing the struggle happening inside your own body. Combine that warmth with even small amounts of ambient light, a charging cable's tiny LED, a sliver of streetlight through a gap in the curtains, the glow of a digital clock, and you've created an environment that's quietly working against the very hormone you spent the entire evening carefully trying to protect through every other habit on this list. Sleeping in a cooler, fully dark room isn't a luxury habit reserved for people with perfect bedrooms. It's simply removing the obstacles that stand between you and what your body was already, naturally, trying to do on its own the entire time. 5 habits, all completely free, all happening before most people have even consciously thought about trying to sleep. Let's bring it all together, because the order matters just as much as the habits themselves. Dim, warm lighting in the evening instead of harsh overhead light. The phone physically out of the room a full hour before bed. No caffeine or alcohol close to bedtime. A quiet handwritten ritual instead of a screen to wind down with. And a cool, genuinely dark room to let your body finish the job it already knows how to do. None of this requires a supplement, a subscription, a tracker, or a single dollar spent on anything new. What it requires is something much smaller and, frankly, much harder to sell to anyone. Rethinking the order of your last 90 minutes before bed, because that exhausting, unrestful sleep you've been living with was never really about how many hours you logged on an app. It was about hormones, quietly rising or quietly being blocked. And hormones, more than almost anything else in the human body, respond directly to habit. So here's what we gently suggest. Not next week, not eventually, tonight. Tonight, dim the lights an hour earlier than you normally would. Put your phone in another room, somewhere you'd actually have to get up to reach it. Skip the second coffee after lunch and skip the nightcap before bed, just for one night as an experiment if nothing else. Write 3 lines about your day instead of opening an app to scroll. And turn the thermostat down just a little more than feels immediately comfortable when you first climb into bed. That's it. 5 small shifts in one specific order repeated nightly, costing nothing and asking very little. The woman in Nara with her notebook and her warm tea has never once, in all the years she's done this, described any of it as a sleep routine or a protocol. To her, it's simply how a night ends, the same way the day simply begins. If this changed the way you think about your own nights, share it with someone who's been doing everything right on paper, every gadget, every app, every supplement, and still can't figure out why they're so exhausted. They may be one quiet, ordinary evening away from finally finding out why. This has been a look into the science and philosophy behind sleep and the body's evening rhythm, not a prescription, a perspective. If this hit you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop a comment letting us know which one of these 5 habits you're starting with tonight. We'll see you in the next one.